Hello and welcome everybody, and thank you all so much for joining us today for our Livable Future Live event series. Today we are going to be talking about PFAS, what they are, the dangers that they pose, how they're currently being monitored and regulated, which, spoiler alert, our panelists will get into this, is not nearly enough. But most importantly, we'll also be talking about the work that we're doing along with allies and supporters like all of you to change that. So thank you all for joining us today for this very important conversation. I'm going to give people just another minute to keep getting logged on. And in the meantime, I just have a couple of Zoom housekeeping reminders. And I'd also like to share a few upcoming events that you can join us for in the next few months. So while I'm doing that, please take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat as we are getting started here. So first, just a few Zoom reminders. If you need to turn on closed captioning to add subtitles to your screen, just click on the Show Captions button in your Zoom toolbar to turn those on. Please also continue to use the chat box during this event as a space to share your thoughts and have a conversation with fellow attendees here today. And we will have some time for Q&A with our panelists today. So if you have questions for them as you're listening to the conversation, you can just add those to the Q&A box that you see in your Zoom toolbar as well. And finally, we are recording today's event and we'll share that later this week, along with any of the links that we share in the chat today. So to start us off, I just want to share a little bit about Food and Water Watch for those of you who may be new here. So Food and Water Watch is a national organization fighting for sustainable food, clean water, and a livable climate for all of us. And we do this by mobilizing activists to build political power at all levels of government. So we're working on federal legislation that would bring sweeping change to food, water, and climate policy. And we also have organizers who are working on the ground in states across the country on issues that are impacting local communities, including protecting our water from contamination and making sure that everyone has access to clean, affordable water. And it's really your membership in Food and Water Watch that powers this work. I'm sure that many of you have heard of Giving Tuesday, which is a movement guided by the philosophy of radical generosity and community building. And a very generous donor of ours has agreed to match the funds that we raise from Giving Tuesday. And since it is just around the corner, we're starting the match a little early, which means that any gift that you make today will be matched 2 to 1, which means triple the impact. So if you'd like to make a gift to take advantage of this match, you can text the word gift to the number 23321, or you can click on the link that we'll put in the chat for you. And again, any gift you make today will be matched. So as I mentioned at the start, this event is part of our monthly event series called Livable Future Live, which is just a great opportunity for us to come together as a community, learn more about current events, organizing campaigns that we're working on, and hear from leading experts on these issues. So I invite you to join us again for one of our upcoming events over the next few months. In December, as we're closing out the year, we're hosting a sort of State of the Union of our food, water, and climate to assess some of our biggest victories from the past year, some lessons learned, and the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead as we go into a very big election year. And then in January, I am excited to announce that we're hosting a special author talk with Jake Biddle. He's the author of a book called The Great Displacement, which looks at climate migration and how climate change is impacting the geography of the United States. And this book was our executive director when known as Book of the Year selection. So in January, they'll be sitting down together to discuss it. And we'll put a link in the chat where you can sign up for both of these events. So with that, let's get to today's conversation. Again, we are talking about PFAS. So let me go ahead and introduce our experts. So first, we have Mary Grant, who is Food and Water Watch's Public Water for All Director. And she works with our organizers on campaigns to support safe and affordable water. And she's going to be our wonderful moderator this afternoon. Next, we have Natalie Balbuena, who's a member of our research team, and she's the author of a new report on PFAS that we released just last week. It's called PFAS and the Chemistry of Concealment, and we'll be digging deeper into her findings today. And last but not least, we are thrilled to be joined by Kyla Bennett, who is the Director of Science Policy at Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility. She previously worked at EPA Region 1 as a wetlands permit reviewer and as the region's wetlands enforcement coordinator. And she joined PEER when she became a whistleblower herself. And now with PEER, she's been focusing on addressing PFAS contamination and regulation. So thank you all so much for being here today. Very excited to see you all. As I mentioned earlier, we will have time for questions at the end. So as you're listening, if you have questions for any of our speakers, go ahead and drop those in the Q&A box. But for now, Mary, I will pass things over to you.
Thank you, Kate, and thank you to everyone for joining us today. I'm excited to moderate this excellent discussion about these toxic forever chemicals, per and polyfluoroalkyl substances, PFAS. These lab-made, long-lasting chemicals have been used in a variety of products since the 1940s, from Teflon pans to Scotch-Guard stain repellent, from firefighting foam to food containers. Now they contaminate our bodies and our environment. They are found in the soil, our water supplies, and even the rain. But the science is clear. No amount of PFAS is safe for us. Our panelists today are going to discuss the dangers of these toxic chemicals, the state of federal regulation or lack of federal regulation, and the forces at play. We will have a rich discussion today, so let's dive in. My first question is for you, Kyla. Can you help us set the stage and describe what the latest science says about PFAS? What is the scale of this crisis? How bad are PFAS really? And generally, why should we, as the public, be concerned about PFAS?
Sure, that's the $64,000 question right there. The scale of the crisis is huge. It's worldwide, actually. And just as a little bit of background, so you understand why we should be so concerned, PFAS are a class of chemicals. And right now, we don't even know how many there are. EPA estimates about 14,000. But part of the problem is that we can only test for about 70 of these 14,000. So we don't even know the chemical formulas of the vast number of these PFAS that are out there. And the one thing that all of these chemicals have in common is this very, very strong carbon-fluorine backbone, if you will. Every PFAS chemical has carbon and fluorine, and that carbon-fluorine bond is one of the strongest known to organic chemistry. So it doesn't break down naturally. So that's why these chemicals have gotten the name forever chemicals, because they just simply don't break down. And because they've been used in commerce since the 40s, 50s, they have spread everywhere. They're everywhere from the Arctic Circle down to, Australia, United States, Europe, Japan, absolutely everywhere. Virtually every American has PFAS in their blood because there's so much in our consumer products. As you said, Mary, they're in our clothing, they're in our food, they're in our rain, they're in our water, they're in our frying pans and our couches and our carpets and our guitar strings and our makeup. They're in cleaning products and fuel. They're just virtually everywhere. And because they can't be destroyed, they're considered what chemists call persistent, but they also bioaccumulate, which means that they will build up in your body because they don't break down. So it's an additive type of thing. The more that you consume or that you're exposed to through inhalation or dermal absorption, the more you'll get in your blood. And once you reach a certain level in your blood, you start getting these pretty horrific health effects. And in fact, we now know that two of the most common PFAS, PFOS and PFOA, actually cause cancer. They cause kidney cancer, testicular cancer, and they're linked with a host of other bad health outcomes. So the bottom line is we need to be concerned because these chemicals are ubiquitous, they're making us sick, and they can exacerbate mortality.
That's so disturbing. And PFAS are used in so many different products. But we also know there's a couple key players that produce these chemicals. These are lab-made chemicals. These aren't naturally occurring, lab-made. There are certain chemical companies like 3M and Dupont who made them. Natalie, can you talk briefly about when these companies found out that PFAS was toxic? I mean, they've been used since the 40s. When did they learn that PFAS was toxic? And then when did the public find out?
Yeah, of course. So they essentially knew from outright in the beginning. I want to say the first, documents that were discovered date back to the late 40s and early 50s. And from then onward, they more or less get progressively worse. You have studies that begin by just observing the size of livers and how they change in rats, and then it turns into examining dogs for cancer, and then there's studies that come out that, oh, we have our workers coming down with cancer now, and birth defects and birth deformities. And unfortunately, all of that was hidden from the public because they use this thing called CBI, which stands for confidential business information, to keep that from the public, claiming it was private property, intellectual property that they didn't need to release. And so the world not only did not know about the toxic effects of PFAS, but like in general, the chemical existed until a key case in 1999, where a lawyer named Robert Below, he took on a case of a small town farmer who noticed his cows were dying, and he had lived next to a Dupont plant. And that small case and that initiative like really just sparked everything. From there, all this stuff was released, all the information came out, and people started to really pay attention.
That case was actually covered by the documentary Dark Waters featuring Mark Ruffalo. It's a great documentary if you haven't seen it, but it's wild to think that it took a lawyer suing a company in order to expose these the toxicity of these compounds that companies have known for decades about. So even though these companies knew about the toxic effects of PFAS for decades, it's just in the last year or so, after sustained public pressure from activists and advocates, including frontline groups, led by frontline groups, and including national partners like Food and Water Watch and PEER, the EPA has finally proposed some federal regulations for a handful of PFAS. Kyla, I want to turn it to you. Can you describe what these proposals would do? And are they enough? What more should EPA and Congress do to protect people?
Sure. So EPA's Office of Water in March of this year proposed what we call MCLs, maximum contaminant levels, which is actually regulatory enforceable limits for the amount of PFAS that you can have in drinking water. Unfortunately, they only are proposing to regulate 6 PFAS. And remember, there are 14,000 or more. So 6 is really a drop in the bucket. But they are proposing fairly low limits for PFOA and PFOS, those 2 really dangerous ones. They're proposing 4 parts per trillion of each as a level in your drinking water. And then they're also proposing to regulate another 4 with something they call a hazard index, which isn't a concentration. It's an algebraic equation that you have to do based on what they think the toxicity of these other 4 PFAS are. And those PFAS are Gen X, which was supposedly the safer replacement for PFOA, but it's not safer. It may actually be more dangerous than PFOA. PFBS, PFNA, and PFHXS. So they're proposing to regulate 6. The first 2, as I said, PFOA and PFOS, with a 4 part per trillion limit. Although it's important to note that in their proposed rule, they have a MCLG, which is a maximum contaminant level goal of 0 for these chemicals. And they actually say in the rule that there is no safe dose of PFOA and PFOS in drinking water. Just like lead, there's literally no safe dose of these. The reason they are setting the limit at 4 parts per trillion is because there are a lot of labs that have difficulty measuring amounts below that because it's such a tiny amount. But when you think about it, the reason this is so concerning is that these minute amounts of chemical are dangerous. And so therefore EPA is seeking a 0 amount. Now, is it enough? Absolutely not. What EPA really needs to do is define PFAS broadly. Right now, there isn't even a consistent definition of PFAS at EPA. And unless you can define something, you can't regulate it. So we have disparate definitions, even within the same agency, between the states and the federal government, between different agencies in the federal government. EPA needs to define them broadly, regulate them as a class, and ban all non-essential uses, which is most of them. I mean, we don't need PFAS in our mascara. I mean, that's a convenience, not a necessity. Are there essential uses? Maybe. Some medicines like Paxlovid is a PFAS. Prozac is a PFAS. Some medical devices have PFAS in them. So there might be some essential uses that we need to hold on to for now until we can find a safer alternative. But basically, that's what EPA needs to do: define them broadly, regulate them as a class, and ban all non-essential uses.
Natalie, would you like to add anything or outline some other key recommendations?
Yeah, of course. Kyla touched on one of the big key things, which is, failing to define PFAS. It's a huge class of over 12,000 chemicals. We need a way to categorize what we actually need to use and what we don't need to use for the sake of saving a couple profit margins or whatever. The other large part is the actual failure of information that we have at disposal to us. This is partially because we found out very late in the game, since the early 2000s, the public was aware of that this was a thing that we needed to look for. And the thing to think about is, how do you test or how do you protect yourself against something that you don't even know what you're protecting yourself against and what levels and where it is? And there hasn't been any nationwide efforts to really collect a lot of data until recently, with the recent passing of the US UCMR 5, which is nationwide testing protocol that the EPA gives out. It's done across a certain number of years. And recently they named PFAS. I think it was about, of the however many they proposed, a majority of them were PFAS to be tested. So that will hopefully bring up some more information that we can work off of. And then the other big thing is really just the influence of the chemical industry in general, both in their tactics to control the narrative, distort the public disclosure, distort the information they have, and in general, just lobbying as well. A lot of influence of the chemical industry has in fact impacted the way a lot of organizations have run their protocols when it comes to regulating these chemicals. A lot of whistleblowers may speak to that. There's been a lot of documented interference in these kinds of things. I think the Trump administration had somebody modify a toxicity assessment. Other officials at research agencies were told to modify certain words when it came to PFAS. So there's just a lot of influence there.
So let's dive into that a little bit more. Natalie, you recently published a new Food and Water Watch report on PFAS, and you found mountains of evidence documenting how the PFAS industry, along with their allies like the American Chemistry Council, the chemical trade lobby groups, have undertaken massive lobbying efforts as well as campaign contributions. Then they've been very successful at preventing regulations from being passed through Congress. Can you tell us about what you found and why we don't have good PFAS regulations after decades of research into their harms?
Of course, yeah, this speaks really a lot to the last point I was talking about, the influence of the chemical industry. I think up until now, no one knew about PFAS, so they had all these other tactics to resort to. But now, up until recently, we found that lawmakers have been really focusing on pushing out PFAS legislation. And so with that, you come and introduce this new tactic, lobbying and using money for things. And so with that, we found that analyzing a certain period that basically ran parallel to the rate at which those bills are being introduced, we found that a lot of PFAS producers, the major ones that are current top PFAS producers, as well as some historical ones that came up in the report, such as Dupont, that they used up to about over 55 million to lobby these things, alongside the ACC, which used 58 million. And that's just really the PFAS industry as a whole. PFAS is a thing that impacts everybody. It's a thing that impacts all industries, or most industries, even if they intentionally use it or not. And so in some cases, we found that there were links directly to the oil and gas industry, that they use PFAS in their fracking fluids. And we found that they were present in lobbying PFAS related bills. Their total came up to 67 million. Additionally, again, with the whole multi-industry influence here, there was a coalition that we found that was headed by the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, that was made up of these industries. We had paper, we had plastics, we had textile, and they were taking a definite stance against the regulation of PFAS as a hazardous substance. And in total, they lobbied PFAS-related bills up to around 317 million. And so even though lots of bills were introduced, like over 100, only 2 standalone bills became law amongst all of those. And I think a lot of the lobbying receipts, while they're not necessarily direct, lobbying receipts will never tell you directly which amounts go to where and how much. They kind of just give you a summary of a total each quarter. They kind of tell us the activity that these companies, these industries were trying to throw their money at, essentially. And unfortunately, a lot of great bills did die in a lot of these sessions. Of the few that actually managed to move forward in any way, the PFAS Action Act, which had different versions passed or trying to be passed in different years, was a very comprehensive one. And, as a result, a lot of people in the PFAS supportive sector feared it. And so they threw a lot at it. They threw a lot of money. They threw a lot of lobbyists. They put in a lot of effort towards it. And even though it passed House, it ended up dying in a Senate committee, which again poses kind of an even more of a concern, because we looked at that Senate committee, the Senate committee which that really great bill went to, and we found that 13 out of 19 of those members received campaign contributions from all of the companies and industries that we had looked at during that time frame, 2019 to 2022. And I mean, that really doesn't bode well for any future legislation that manages to even scrape by and pass the House. There's a lot of things here that tell us just how much influence the industry has with its money.
And we know right now in Congress and at EPA, corporations are lobbying as we speak to avoid being held accountable, likely for PFAS pollution. Kyla, I want to turn it back to you. Can you talk about some of these efforts, such as efforts to narrow the definition of PFAS even further? There's a bill package in the Senate that would exempt like a handful of industries from regulation and being held accountable. And I also want to open it up to you to provide information about corporate influence at EPA as well, since Natalie's report focused on Congress. And generally, can you couch this or speak to it in terms of what it would mean for people if these corporate efforts are successful, and why it is important for these polluters to be held accountable?
Sure, those are all great questions. And I think it's important to point out that it's not just lobbyists that are trying to get EPA to define PFAS really narrowly, but it's also the Department of Defense, because the Department of Defense is a sister agency, if you will, to EPA, but they are one of the biggest polluters in this country, in the world. The US DoD is one of the biggest polluters in the world, and they are responsible for a lot of PFAS contamination. So they have been lobbying very hard to make EPA, first of all, define PFAS narrowly, but also to keep the levels, the proposed regulatory limits high, because they don't want to be burdened with the cost of cleanup of all of the Department of Defense facilities across the country, let alone the world. So it's not just the lobbyists, but it's also other federal agencies that are responsible. So the one bill, the Superfund bill, which is CERCLA, everyone knows it as Superfund, which is one of EPA's really successful bills. It's slow, but it's successful. And it basically is a strict liability statute, which requires polluters to pay for land that they've polluted. And there's a big effort in Congress to exempt certain industry from this proposed law, which EPA wants, which would add PFOA and PFOS, just 2 PFAS, to the Superfund cleanup standards. And they want to exempt Department of Defense facilities, airports, farmers, because of biosolids, which is a whole nother issue that I won't take a lot of time of, but just so you're aware, biosolids is just a euphemism for sewage sludge, human sewage sludge. And when our waste goes into a sewer system and goes to a wastewater treatment plant, the wastewater treatment plant is left with all of this stuff after it's allegedly cleaned. And what EPA proposed years ago is, let's take some of the water out, dry it up, and then we'll have a great fertilizer, and people can put it on crops, and it'll be a great cheap fertilizer, and we'll take care of the problem of where do we put all this stuff. Turns out that the wastewater, the biosolids or the sewage sludge has a ton of PFAS in it, and farmers all across the country have been applying the sewage sludge to their farms and their fields, and it is contaminating their soil, it's contaminating the crops that they grow, and it's contaminating the animals that are eating those crops, to the point where farms in Michigan, in Maine, in New Mexico, all over the country have had to shut down because their milk and their meat have so much PFAS that it's not safe for people to consume. But to get back to the Superfund law, by trying to exempt these certain categories of potential polluters, the problem is that it will disincentivize people from trying to stop using PFAS. I mean, the whole solution here is to turn off the tap of PFAS contamination. We have to stop putting PFAS in products. And if we start exempting airports and farmers and wastewater treatment facilities from these laws, then what's going to happen is nobody's going to have the incentive to try to stop putting PFAS in there in the first place. And we have to keep in mind that EPA has very, very broad enforcement discretion. So EPA has a hard time going after the worst violators. They're not going to go after farmers. They can use their discretion to say, this farmer was innocent. They had no idea that the biosolids that they're spreading on their fields contained PFAS, and it's not their fault, and they shouldn't have to pay for it, which is the truth. They are not going to enforce against those people. So we really feel very strongly that they should not start exempting certain industries from Superfund, the PFAS, regulating PFAS under Superfund, because other industries are going to start clamoring for it to be exempt as well. So it's going to open the door to something that EPA has never done before, which is exempting certain industries from what is a very powerful strict liability statute. And then your last question, I don't know if I covered them all, but I hope I did. The last question was EPA itself. And that's a big one. It's not just industry and the American Chemistry Council that's causing all these problems. There is malfeasance in EPA itself. The Office of Pesticide Program and the TSCA program, the Toxic Substances Control Act, the people that do the new chemicals, approve new chemicals to go out in commerce, they're broken. These two programs really need to be raised and built back up from the ground, because they have been infiltrated by industry itself. There's a revolving door. So these managers will go work for industry and then come back to EPA and do things that are good for industry, and then go back to industry and come back again. For whatever reason, they are actually manipulating data, manipulating math. They are taking scientists' results on how toxic a chemical is and saying, no, just delete that. We don't want to say that. We want to get this chemical out on the market. And if you don't believe me, you should read a very powerful 10-part series written by Sharon Lerner, Lerner, when she was at the Intercept. She's now at ProPublica, but when she was at Intercept, she worked with 5 whistleblowers that were my clients at EPA. And they came with receipts. We have emails and audio recordings and so much evidence of this malfeasance at EPA and this capture by industry of this division in EPA that it's absolutely stunning and very disheartening. And I strongly urge you to read that series if you can.
Simply outrageous. So thank you, Kyla. And I think it's also clear that we need to stop the bad legislation, something we can actually do by building people power. So Food and Water Watch is building that public pressure on Congress right now to ask them and demand that they put public health first and hold the corporations and industries, Department of Defense accountable. You can add your voice by sending a message to your members of Congress right now. We'll put a link in the chat where you can do that right now. Take action right now. Tell your Congress members, hold them accountable. Let's start the cleanup. Let's have polluters pay, and let's start to turn off that spigot of PFAS. So Natalie, I want to turn it back to you. PFAS are everywhere, but studies have found that some communities are disproportionately impacted. They're more likely to be exposed to toxic and less able to address contamination through home filtration or updated treatment plants. Can you talk about how this issue of PFAS contamination is connected to the core of environmental justice and what needs to be done?
Yeah, this is definitely an environmental justice issue, primarily because it really connects to a lot of the historical injustices when it comes to placing low-income communities of color next to certain chemical producing, plastic producing, fracking sites, and just having them exposed to all these toxins and then being left with not only like paying for the development of those things, but also a lot of health effects that we didn't really get to talk too much about in the session. But you do any search, any research website, a lot of things will come up about how this is such a really comprehensive toxin that affects almost all parts of your body. And so you're pushing that issue of not only dealing with paying for the infrastructure, but now you're paying for your health, which is a very long-term and complicated issue. And there have been actual studies that have come out to support this claim that PFAS is something that affects the low-income BIPOC community as a whole more so than other more privileged communities. Again, tying it back to this siting issue, tying it back to even how we're exposed to the items that we consume. A lot of PFAS are found in, or can tend to be found in very heavily plastic items. Those items may be usually found in dollar stores, things like that. And additionally, the PFAS regulation that has been proposed only covers private, or only covers public water systems. It doesn't cover private wells, and so you can imagine that the financial assistance that the government might have been able to provide to a public system is just not even there for those that have private systems that they have to take care of. And so there's just this really large idea of cost, both in terms of, the intangible health, quality of life, and those kinds of more complicated costs versus the direct, okay, so this thing is going to cost more to build, this thing is going to cost more to even treat or to address. In my home or in my municipality, those costs are passed down right from these technologies. It's passed on to these bills, and for people who have for people who are of low income, like it's something that they're going to have to grapple with, choosing clean water, choosing to pay for water, things like that. And moreover, that's just a whole other reason why we need the Water Act as a lot of funding support for a lot of these communities. Because as a people, as a whole, regardless of who we've been left to kind of deal with this on our own. The companies and industries want to push this bill onto us. And so you can imagine people who are not as privileged position would have even more to tackle with on their plate. And so we really need to tackle this through a lot of legislative efforts for support.
The Water Act is a comprehensive bill that would fund both updating our treatment plants to remove it from water systems, but also to provide funding for testing and filtration of household wells. So we've talked a lot about the challenges to effectively regulate PFAS and the very powerful corporate interests we're up against. But despite all of that, we are making some progress. Some work has been done. A lot of work has been done by groups on the ground, these frontline communities, national allies, and our advocacy on this is working. We're facing a lot of pushback, but we can continue to win stronger regulations. So I just wanted to open it up to Kyla and Natalie. What are some recent successes we've had, and what opportunities do you see ahead of us?
Well, the states are trying to fill the regulatory void that EPA has left. So some of the states are doing great work. Maine comes to mind. Maine has some of the best PFAS laws out there right now, which was a little surprising to me, but good for them. New York has some good ones. California is starting. Massachusetts has some really good bills pending, and we regulate. I live in Massachusetts. We regulate 6 PFAS in our drinking water and have since 2020. Sorry, for 3 years now, almost 4 years. And so the states are defining PFAS broadly and starting to put in bills, not only regulating PFAS in water, but also they're putting out do not eat advisories for fish and deer. They're regulating PFAS in food wrappers. They're regulating PFAS in artificial turf and other consumer products, car seats and carpets and things like that. And when you educate the public, and the public starts pushing back against the companies that are making these products, that works actually. So, when you get enough people calling a company and saying, hey, do you have PFAS in your product? They start to take it out. So for example, IKEA has no PFAS in any of their products. Home Depot and Lowe's, they've taken all the PFAS out of their carpets because it's been in a lot of carpets. So there are companies starting to respond, and you can start to get some PFAS-free products. You have to be careful, though, because there's also a lot of greenwashing out there, particularly when it comes to nonstick pans. I would never buy any nonstick pan because I don't trust any of them, but most of them have PFAS in it. So I think those are some victories that we can take heart from. And the only other thing I can mention is that you can minimize your own risk. I personally was able to reduce my blood levels of PFAS by being careful of what I eat, what I have in my home, getting rid of everything I knew that had PFAS, and trying to be as careful as I can. So there are ways to do it. It's not easy, but it is possible.
I'm going to turn it to Natalie if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I mean, I think something the report really tries to also highlight here is just the fact that, now within the past 4 years, we have legislation that has been introduced. We have people who are like writing about these things, like writing bills and proposing measures to do something about it. Even if only 2 managed to become law, at least we have 2 now versus, back in the 30s or 40s, we didn't even know about this. We had no one regulating it. We had no one in Congress like, oh, we should probably write a bill about this. And I think that kind of draws it back to like just our personal attention about it as well. As a public, there is a lot of power in just being aware about what you surround yourself with, what products you choose to support or not, how your diet affects you when it comes to these kinds of toxins that unfortunately, like, we can't really control a lot of it, especially when it comes to our drinking water. Like, these chemicals are so pervasive, they're so able to move quickly. Like, PFAS rains down on us. Like, it's like, how are you going to shield yourself from stuff that's in the air? It's when faced with that like immensity of a problem, you got to really focus on, well, what can I control? And like, that's my awareness, right? Kyla was saying, changing your diet. A lot of these things have to do with food as well. Like, what kind of items do you come in contact to that you're able to avoid? What kind of switches can you make, right? Both financially and non-financially. Like, there are a lot of key tools that I think begin with awareness.
And as people become aware, they want to know what actions they can take. So both of you mentioned that a little bit before. And it's also the end of our moderated panel. Now I'm going to the Q&A part. And just like the bulk of the questions coming in beforehand, coming in live right now as we're talking, are about how people can protect themselves individually, filter recommendations. What about when they're buying a home with a well? What products should they buy? How can they find PFAS on the labels? So we know regulations are non-existent and insufficient, and they're long overdue. So as we push for stronger regulations that can protect everyone, what can people do individually at home to protect themselves and their families? I'll turn it to Kyla, then Natalie.
Sure. I think the number one thing you can do is get a filter if you can afford one. I have one. My home is my municipal well is highly contaminated. It's costing our town $10 million. We're a town of 25,000 people, costing us $10 million to build the filtration plants necessary to take the PFAS out. But in the interim, those are not fully online yet. It's taken 3 years. But I have a filter in my kitchen sink, and it costs about $129. I would highly recommend that people go to NSF to look for certified filters. They're an independent certification lab. They will certify whether a filter can actually take PFAS out or not. And that's the best you can do right now. But keep in mind that according to EPA, your PFAS load, 20% of it is from your water, and 80% is from food and inhalation and dermal absorption and other things. So water will take care of part of it, but not the whole thing. The other thing I would highly suggest that people do is avoid plastics, particularly number 2 plastics. And there was an excellent article that came out in September by Bloomberg News, Esme Deprez. She wrote this very she took a deep dive into plastics, and there's one company here in the US that will fluorinate plastic containers for everyone. And these containers are used for everything: shampoos and conditioners and household cleaners and food and fuel and art supplies and automotive supplies. And it turns out that this fluorination process will actually create PFAS, and the PFAS are leaching out at very high quantities into the contents of those containers. And so if you've got shampoo, for example, that's got high levels of PFAS, well, the skin on your scalp is the thinnest skin anywhere in your body. So it can dermally absorb into your bloodstream just from using that PFAS contaminated shampoo. So one of the first things I did was I got rid of all number 2 plastics in my house. I try to avoid plastics anyway because of climate change. They're just a fossil fuel product, as you all know. But number 2 plastics in particular, those are the ones that are fluorinated. Not all of them, but a lot of them. We don't even know. It's confidential business information. As Natalie talked about earlier, we don't know which containers are fluorinated. So I'm just trying to avoid all number 2. I try to avoid plastic as best I can. I buy shampoo bars and shampoo conditioner in bars. Conditioner in bars, so you don't have any plastic bottles. I try to buy food in glass or in bulk. And I try to just avoid that plastic altogether. And I would highly suggest everybody do that.
And Natalie, do you have anything to add about other recommendations for how people can protect themselves?
Yeah, of course. I generally also look at it as like when it comes to clothing, right? A lot of waterproof clothing and waterproof items. Like when you see the label waterproof, you may think, oh, like it's great, I won't have stains on my carpet. Yeah. I don't think right now like that's necessarily gonna help anyone if you just, it's more of a trust in whether or not like producers will begin making waterproof things without PFAS is something I wouldn't personally trust until I've seen regulation that has been passed for a while to know that those production cycles have essentially turned over to not include things that are waterproof. I wouldn't personally go out to buy new things or any new waterproof items, so to speak, just because there's no guarantee and there's no way to really check every single brand that you buy to see if they have PFAS in them or not as of yet, just because there is no regulations against that, that's regulating what producers produce or what products they come out with. I found the news to be a very good source of information when it comes to those things, like reportings on like Lululemon leggings and period underwear, raincoats from REI, things like that, that I have relied on the news for to see headlines and reports on like legal proceedings. And I think pivoting it back to food a bit, food is a major source of PFAS. There's evidence that plants uptake PFAS. There's evidence that there's PFAS in meat and in dairy. And there are studies that have examined like habits when it comes to the food you consume. And something that if you're able to change would be to primarily not eat processed foods and foods with takeout. There are studies that have linked the increase in PFAS in people's blood levels to increase in processed food diets. And the same thing has gone for a lot of very heavy meat and dairy centered diets as well. if it's something that you can change even slightly, like it's less, and less is always better when it comes to PFAS in your blood.
Can I just add something really quickly to that, which is there's a great website, which I think can be put in the chat, that sells PFAS-free items, and there are PFAS-free rain gear, which I bought some. And also, this is it sounds like a privileged thing to say, but I don't think it is. If you can eat organic, eat organic. And that's because, remember when we talked earlier about biosolids and how much PFAS there is in biosolids? Organic farms are not allowed to use biosolids. And so you can get cheap organic produce at Walmart, at Target, at Aldi's, at Trader Joe's. So there are some really reasonably priced organic if you can buy organic. And also there was a recent article that came out that showed, unsurprisingly, that vegans have less PFAS in their blood than carnivores or omnivores, because it does biomagnify through the food chain. So there seems to be the most PFAS in things like shellfish, especially the bottom dwellers like lobsters and clams and oysters and things like that. So stepping away from shellfish, meat, and dairy and eating organic are other ways that you can reduce your load of PFAS.
We had a couple follow-ups in the chat and the Q&A about, just really quickly, if you can say whether or not you recommend filtering things like washers and dryers and showers. To what extent should people be filtering for their water supply?
I have a filter at my kitchen sink, and I use that for my dogs. I use that for ice. I use that for coffee. I use it for making pasta or boiling corn or anything that's where the water is absorbed into the food. I use regular tap water for, like, my husband eats hard-boiled eggs. That's just regular tap water because the water doesn't go in through the shell. But I also have a filter, just a regular GAC filter on my shower. Does it help? Probably a little. A lot, I don't know, but I haven't taken a bath since I found out that my water has been contaminated. Looking forward to when our filtration systems can come online and I can do that again. But washers and dryers, no, that doesn't matter so much in your clothes. But shower, it might be worth trying a granular activated carbon filter on your shower, and then definitely one for the water that you're ingesting.
And there was another follow-up question from Anne about what alternatives exist for PFAS and the range of products. I know you put in PFAS safe products, but have alternatives been used long enough to ensure their safety? Talk a little bit about the safety of these alternatives as well.
So it really depends on what the application is, because there's so many uses of PFAS. So for example, do we have an alternative for PFAS in Paxlovid? No, we don't, not yet. Do we have an alternative for PFAS in your mascara? Sure. One is, don't put it in there. Who cares if it's waterproof or not? I mean, if you're going to get cancer from your mascara, I'd say it's not worth it. Let's take it out. But there are also, particularly for the plastic containers that I was talking about before, the number 2 plastics, there are plastic barrier methods that don't use any fluorine whatsoever. It's more of a nylon. I mean, look, plastic is bad, but there are ways to get around it. Go back to the old-fashioned glass and aluminum cans or tin cans for your food. Don't go for plastic wrapped foods. So there are ways you can avoid it. You can't say, oh, chemical XYZ is going to replace PFAS, because the problem is that PFAS is used for so many different things that it's not possible to say there's one replacement for all of it. It depends on the product. So I think it's also really important to note that what industry does is they make what we call regrettable substitutions. And once we start regulating a PFAS, like PFOA or PFOS, they just tweak a formula and put out another PFAS that is not regulated. So we don't, and sometimes, like Gen X was a replacement for PFOA, and it turns out it may be worse, more toxic than PFOA. So we don't want any PFAS replacing what we have now. We just want to move away from them entirely. And there's a multitude of ways we can do that. Some of them are even non-chemical ways, like going back to glass, going back to metal. We don't need all this plastic.
So I want to take us back a little bit to the need for policy change to address this. So people don't have to worry about all these different steps they have to take individually. While we work for those policy change, they should be armed with that knowledge. But we also need to keep the pressure on so that we turn off the faucet of PFAS. So Nora is asking, how can I influence local, state, federal policy on improving regulations and reducing water contamination? Maybe I'll turn this to Natalie. Do you have thoughts on this? And then I'll turn it to Kyla.
So a lot of it has to do, unfortunately, with legislation. It has to do with people, I think, more or less, demanding a change of some sorts and becoming aware of it. There are a lot of representatives. A lot of these bills have been proposed, right? Over 100. We have a lot of great representatives that are already thinking about these issues. They're really like trying to tackle this issue from a very rounded perspective. I think Kyla mentioned Maine. Like Maine has been and was the first state to actually think about PFAS when it comes to meat and dairy. And like that's something to applaud, right? To get our local legislatures and hopefully in the end our nationwide legislature to think about this problem as one that affects every single part of our lives. Yeah.
And Kyla, do you have more to add?
I do. I think also education is really important, particularly at the municipal level. So as an example, artificial turf has PFAS in it. And I and a bunch of other women have been going around the country attending all of these virtual municipal meetings, telling people that the artificial turf has PFAS in it and they shouldn't put it down. And some people had no idea. So I think education can be a really strong component, particularly at the local level. Here in New England, we have our local town governments or town meeting where literally everybody in town shows up in an auditorium and raises their hand to vote. It's very archaic. Some people hate it. I kind of like it. But I actually got our town to vote down a playground that poured in place rubber because it has PFAS. And they voted against it because I got up to the microphone and explained how dangerous it was. So I think educating people is a really good way to start forcing local change.
And I also want to bring us back to the idea of polluters paying too. So as we push for these changes, part of that is also we want to hold these corporations, the military, accountable for contamination of our environment. So there was a question about a lawsuit against 3M for PFAS contamination and some other related questions around how many corporations have been held accountable and forced to pay for cleanup? And does this cover all forms of industrial pollution? When will this go into effect? And just generally if you could speak to how we can hold these polluters accountable, just as our final question before we wrap up this Q&A.
There are a lot of lawsuits, a lot of class action lawsuits against 3M, Dupont, Chemours, the big companies. But there are these smaller companies that also create PFAS. But I think what's going to happen is it's going to be kind of a domino effect. And once these big class action lawsuits get settled for literally billions of dollars, I think what's going to happen is that some of these smaller companies are going to go, uh-oh, we have to pay attention to this potential liability coming down the pike. So we better move away from PFAS. And I think that's just going to happen more and more as these cases start settling. And some of them are settling. There's the International Association of Firefighters is now suing the PFAS companies they have PFAS in their turnout gear. And they're getting cancer from that. Firefighters, the biggest cause of death for firefighters is cancer, not getting killed in a fire, because their turnout gear, the gear that's supposed to protect them, is full of PFAS and they're dermally absorbing it. So there are lawsuits everywhere. My town is part of a lawsuit. We're trying to recoup our money for our $10 million filtration plant. They're happening everywhere. And once these start playing out, I think that industry is going to shift away from PFAS because they're going to realize that it's not worth it. But until that happens, they're going to try to eke out as much money out of these chemicals as they can.
And Natalie, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think lawsuits are a great mechanism for, getting people who've been affected by PFAS some sort of compensation and drawing attention and at least getting them to pay for something. But I do think it's really important to really talk to your local officials about these issues. Call them, make sure that they have it on their platform. That's a thing, that they even tell other people, or like to even include in their TV ads, or things like that. Awareness is really, really key here. The more people know about it, the more we can begin boycotting these things, the more that we can begin demanding better and safer production. Again, as Kyla was mentioning, PFAS is found in firefighting foam. We don't know how to destroy PFAS. We don't know how to deal with these things in a way that doesn't push a lot of the bill onto us, because it shouldn't be our problem to pay for something that we didn't cause or didn't even know about that's this harmful.
Yeah, and it's shameful. It's shameful that these companies knew. It's shameful that it's contaminating workers, our firefighters, military service members. This is just something that we need to hold Congress accountable, to take action, to hold these polluters accountable. So I want to take a moment. So if you didn't already get a chance to do so, please add your voice to the movement by contacting your members of Congress. We'll reshare the link in the chat right now to make sure everyone has an opportunity to do so. Tell Congress members to hold corporations accountable. Don't carve them out of liability. We need to make sure that we can hold these polluters accountable for cleaning up this contamination. So thank you again to our excellent panelists, Kyla and Natalie, and I'm going to turn it back to Kate to wrap us up.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to you, Kyla, Mary, and Natalie, for being here with us today for this really important conversation. I learned so much. I think that, what I took away from this is that while there are a lot of important steps that we can all take to protect ourselves individually, it was really heartening to hear from Natalie and from others how awareness of this truly is growing and how we are seeing some progress. I know we still have a long way to go. But all of the work that you all and everyone here on this call today is doing to raise awareness of this issue, to talk to your members of Congress, is really making a difference. So thank you all for the great work that you're doing. Before we close out today, I just have a couple of final quick reminders for everybody. So as I mentioned at the start, Giving Tuesday is just around the corner, but you can take advantage of our special Giving Tuesday match as of today. And, many of you likely already know this, but Food and Water Watch doesn't take any corporate funding. But, as you've been hearing today, that's exactly what we're up against. We are up against some really powerful corporate industries with a lot of money, but we do not let that stop us. We believe in the power of the people. We believe that grassroots organizing can challenge the status quo and can create the policy change that we need to protect our water and our health. And it's really all of you, our members, who make that possible. And, I know that you all know this. These are long-term fights. They're multi-year fights at the state and federal and local level. And your support just truly goes a long way in building our organizing capacity and the grassroots power to get us there. So if you're able to, I do encourage you to make a gift today. And thanks to the Giving Tuesday match, your gift will be tripled. We'll put the link in the chat for you one more time where you can do that. And I hope that you'll join us next month and in January for our other upcoming Livable Future Live events. In December, as we close out the year, we'll be discussing our state of the climate to look back on some important victories and lessons learned as we head into a big election year. And then in January, we are talking with journalist and author Jake Biddle, who wrote the book, The Great Displacement, to discuss climate migration in the US. We'll put the link in the chat one more time where you can sign up for both of these events. And finally, I know that we shared a lot of great resources and links from Kyla and from others in the chat today. So don't worry if you don't have them all saved. I will be sending out an email tomorrow with this recording and with a roundup of all those resources that were shared. So once you get that, please feel free to share it with friends, family, colleagues, and invite others to get involved in this important work. And in about an hour, you will get an automated email or text message asking you to submit some feedback about today's event. Please do leave a comment. It really helps us inform the conversations that we'll have at future events. And that's all. So thank you all again so much for joining us for today's Livable Future Live event. And I hope that you all have a wonderful afternoon, a happy Thanksgiving next week, and see you in December.